Okay, hello and welcome to the Enterprise Excellence Network webinar series. So today we are joined by Katie Anderson, and Katie will be giving an overview on the topic of learning to lead and leading to learn, and the 3 practices to more intentional people-centered leadership. So just a bit about the network. We are a members-only arena for senior lean leaders. Pre-COVID, we hosted workshops at best practice host sites, and currently we are doing these all online. This is led by Peter Hines as well. So if you'd like to find out anything else about this and how to join, you will receive an email with my contact details and also a link to our website as well, where you can find out more. So today's session will be a 30-minute Q&A session, 30-minute presentation by Katie, followed by a Q&A session, which is approximately 30 minutes. So please add your questions into the questions tab at the end of the webinar, and Peter will deliver these to Katie. Okay, I will now hand over to Peter Hines. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Emma, and good morning, good afternoon, good night, whatever time of day it is to everyone out there. It's my great pleasure to welcome Katie Anderson to this session, and I think we managed to pick the 2 weeks of the year where we're only 7 hours apart instead of the normal 8 hours apart. So Katie's over there in California, and I hope the weather's better than it probably is in Europe at the moment. So Katie, we're looking forward to a great session, and I'll pose some questions from the audience towards the end of the session. So so over to you.
Great. Well, we had a little bit of technical difficulties while we were getting started to share our screen. So let me see if I can get my slides. But while I'm doing that, I am not sure actually if I am having better weather than the UK right now. We're having a cold front through California right now, and it's looking pretty cold and gray. Although I did live in London for a year and a half many moons ago, and I recognize that it's probably still not as cold and gray. So let me see if I do the slideshow here and play from current slide, and let's see if this works. Main screen. Show. Oh, I don't want to show my main screen. Sorry. All right, do you see my slide?
Yeah.
Awesome, we did it correctly. This is amazing. So great, welcome. Thank you, Peter and Emma, for inviting me to be here today. Peter did a great introduction. I am Katie Anderson, based in the San Francisco Bay Area. I did share already that I've lived in many countries around the world. After I graduated from university, I moved to the UK for almost a year and a half. I lived in Australia for 4.5 years as well, where I did my master's degree. And the country I most recently lived in was Japan, which was for my husband's job and ended up being an amazing experience for me, both personally and professionally, and has resulted in the book, Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn, and my wonderful friendship and mentorship with Isao Yoshino, who is a 40-year Toyota leader. And I am really just, one of my life's great joys and privileges has been to not only befriend Mr. Yoshino, but to help capture his wisdom and lessons of 40 years of Toyota and more, and to bring those to you to also enjoy and learn from as well. And my great purpose is to inspire people around the world to live and lead with intention. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about what intention means. And before we get started, though, I want you to set your intention for how engaged you plan to be for the next 50 minutes that we're going to be together today. So on a scale of 1 to 7, pop it in the chat, be honest about where you're at, but this is a way to start bringing some intentional pauses to where we are and help us show up more effectively to align with how we want to be showing up. So pop in the chat where you're at. I'm not going to even be seeing this right now, but Peter and Emma will, and just be honest about where you're at. So 1, you're kind of listening, but really not. 4, you're here, but you're kind of multitasking and doing some other things. And 7, you're fully engaged. Nothing else is going on. And also, I want to say Happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. I am of Irish descent and Welsh and other things too, but and some English and some German in there too. But I will Catherine Hennessy, Brian Jones Anderson. So I have a lot of Irish in me. So happy St. Patrick's Day, and I'm happy that you're here to take a moment out to learn and to celebrate today. So the word intention, why is it so important to me? It has for a long time, yet I discovered a deeper meaning when I lived in Japan. So I have long realized that intention is important, about being purposeful, about choosing how we're showing up, not being reactive, but being proactive. When I moved to Japan, it was just 6 years. I can't believe it was 6 years ago at this point. We moved to Japan. I didn't have business cards. I'd started my consulting practice only about a year before that. And so I asked the business card company to put the word for intention on my card. And this is what it looks like in Japanese, and it's pronounced shiko. And as I started to hand out the card, Japanese people who spoke English, who are the ones I was meeting, and it was great. I was going out with intention to learn as much as possible during that 18-month period, and I started writing a blog so I could share it with you all, which then resulted in the book. But they would say, this is a very powerful word. And I'd say, yes, I believe having intention is very important. They said, no, in Japanese, this word is powerful because the lower part of this word here on the left means heart, and this one here on the right means direction. And I've really taken those symbols to show a deeper meaning of the word intention. It's about connecting with what's important inside of us, our purpose, our goals, who we want to be, and then what is the direction that we need to orient our actions to align with that. So who do we want to be, and how do we then need to show up to actually be that person? And I've been starting to highlight how I see the difference between intentions and goals. So intention is who do you want to be, and then goals and targets are what do you want to achieve. Both are important, but they're very different as well. One is core to who you are, and one is more external. So how does this relate to my book, Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn, and Mr. Yoshino? Ultimately, it's because the secret to Toyota and to lean and to all the continuous improvement that we are trying to do in our organizations, really the only secret, as I learned from Mr. Yoshino, is an attitude towards learning. And that gets to about who we want to be, rather than what we're trying to do in our organizations or the processes we're trying to improve. All of that's really important, but it's about ultimately how do we show up, each of us as individuals, to align with a sense of purpose, and then to align with a sense of purpose for our organizations as well. And this attitude towards learning and improvement is more important than the outcomes that we're achieving. So there's Mr. Yoshino and me, and my last visit to Japan. Amazingly, I was able to sneak in a visit to Japan last January. I got back the first week in February, and we'd already started to hear about the pandemic. Of course, little did we know that a month later everything would just be shutting down. And I was so happy to get to see Mr. Yoshino, even though we continue to talk almost weekly, which was just a gift in my life. I almost titled the book Practicing Hansei. And this is because the Hansei is the Japanese word that means self-reflection. And the meta story of this book, and about learning as well, is that the concept of reflection, and reflection is a source of learning, and how that looking back on our lives or in the moments, we can learn and relearn more things if we can slow down and actually have that attitude towards learning about experiences. And we can learn more deeply with different perspectives over time. Ultimately, I chose Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn because the stories and so many of the takeaways were about leading and about learning. And I want to share with you today some of my key takeaways, and then open it up to conversation as well. What I love about live events is the dialogue that happens less than you just listening to me talk. So a little context, and we'll dive into conversation. So the very first time that I met Mr. Yoshino was actually almost 7 years ago, when I was at the Lean Coaching Summit that the Lean Enterprise Institute puts on in Long Beach, California. And we had just found out about the opportunity to move to Japan, maybe just a handful of weeks before. And I was eager. I was going to talk to John Shook about living in Japan. And lo and behold, totally unplanned, truly, Mr. Yoshino happened to be in Los Angeles, and John Shook asked him to come talk at the conference as well. So Mr. Yoshino was in charge of the NUMI training program back in the 1980s. And NUMMI was the joint venture between Toyota and General Motors, and it was the first international production, opportunity that Toyota was going to have as it was looking to expand globally. And John Shook was the American that they hired to kind of figure out how to work with Americans and American culture. And he was the first non-Japanese employee of Toyota Motor Corporation. And so they're up on stage talking about their relationship as manager and, as they call it at Toyota, subordinate, although it's not meant to be in a negative context. And Mr. Yoshino really blew away any of my preconceived notions about sort of stoic taskmaster senseis. He was jovial, warm, and obviously cared, and is very smart. And he made a comment up on stage, and I was scribbling furiously. And he said his role as a manager, his aim was to develop John by giving him a mission or target and supporting him while he figured out how to reach that target. And then he said something that struck me as incredibly profound, that he had this awareness that as he was developing his subordinate, he was also aware that he was needing to develop himself as well. And this comment, which he didn't actually even remember making when I later asked him when we were spending more time together when I'd moved to Japan, it really sums up to me what a leader's purpose is. And I am now calling this the Leading to Learn framework. It's so simple in concept, yet is much more challenging in practice. And this is going to be the anchor for what we talk about today. And then I have 3 practices that you can take away that you can start implementing and bringing into your life immediately. So a leader's purpose is threefold: set the direction, provide support, and develop yourself. So simple in concept, more difficult in actuality. So the first one, set the direction. So leaders need to provide a challenge, direction, or target. It's been amazing, like even just in the last few months, I've been working with some private clients and some and leaders from around the world in my Leading to Learn Accelerator, and how rare it is for there truly to be clarity of direction or the challenge or what the target that needs to be reached. This is a leader's responsibility to set that direction, to be clear about where we need to go, not necessarily how we get there, but what is the direction we need to go. And the target should be determined by what is needed, not what is achievable. And this is something that I've learned from Mr. Yoshino, how we need to not be setting we can have an error rate of 0.05, that's acceptable. No, we need to do what is actually needed and use that as an opportunity to challenge us for learning and improvement, because it's what you learn from the lessons of not reaching your targets that make you smarter. So yes, we can have interim targets that step by step help us understand how to get there, but ultimately the challenge that we set forward, the long-term challenge and target, needs to be what is needed. The second part of a leader's purpose is to provide support. And this is the real leading to learn component. And how do we have an attitude towards learning for ourselves and have an attitude towards learning as we engage with people in our organization. And this requires leaders to balance both providing challenges and pushing and nurture or providing support. So how do you to both push people into discomfort, to things that maybe they don't know are possible, yet at the same time providing that support that they know that they're not going to be sort of hung out to dry, or if they don't know how to do something. So it's this tension and this continuum that leaders need to always be navigating, and coaches too. So leaders need to create and support the structures and process for learning. So we can't help other people do the improvement or improve themselves, but we can create those structures and opportunities and the support required for them. We also need to value the process of learning over than just the outcome. And sometimes we're going so fast in our organization that we forget part of our purpose is to help people learn. And of course, we're always going to have crises and emergencies and things that need to be fixed now. But if we don't give that space for learning, then we're really missing an incredible opportunity to really create or have that attitude towards learning and to create a organization where we're not always responding to the fires that need to be put out. So where can we give little spaces for learning allow a little bit more opportunity for failure or struggle, and us not jumping in and always sort of giving the answer and fixing it. And we also need to establish the conditions for success and take responsibility for when mistakes happen. There is an incredible story that Mr. Yoshino had not even thought of in like 40 years when we first sat down with purpose to uncover his memories and really work on this book. And I was asking him about his early years at Toyota, and he was telling me about his orientation program, which is amazing, was like over 3 months. And he was always going to be in a back office. He majored in Spanish in university. He was not going to be working on the shop floor. And Toyota and many Japanese companies actually have these extended orientation programs because you do join a company for life. That's shifting now, but that's how it has been historically. And so he was signed out to the Gemba, to the place where the real value creating work happens, which is where the manufacturing shop floor, where the cars were going down the line. And he was assigned to the paint shop. And his job was to pour like a solvent and the paint into a big vat that would mix it up and then spray it on the cars as they went down the line. Well, this is kind of a boring job. And, he kind of, one day he sort of lost track of what he was doing, and I guess he poured something wrong into the container, into the vat. And maybe an hour later, the plant floor manager came running up to the paint shop saying over 100 cars needed to be repainted. The paint was not sticking to the cars. And this is young Yoshino. He had just graduated from university, so he's about 22 years old, and he was thinking, oh my God, like, this was totally my fault. They're gonna yell at me. I'm gonna be fired. And amazingly, that totally opposite thing happened. So they came to him and said, show me what you did. And so he picked up the cans and showed them what they did. And then they looked at each other and said, thank you for making that mistake. We realized that we didn't set up the workplace for you to be successful. It was very clear that the cans had been all labeled in a very similar way, and it was easy to make a mistake and choose the wrong paint cans. So instead of yelling at him or being mad at him, they thanked him for making the mistake and saw that as an opportunity for them to improve the visibleness of the workplace and to do mistake proofing for the future. So how can we as individuals, as leaders, as colleagues, kind of hold back on our immediate response to blame and instead think, what was the process that led to this mistake? Was it actually malintent on the behalf of the person who made the mistake, or was there truly a process breakdown that happened? And so how can we really look at the process and not blame the people? And this can be so transformational in our organizations, and so hard because our human nature is to want to assign blame to somebody. All right, the leader's purpose, third part, is to develop yourself. And this is so important too. Often it's easy to think, oh, all these other people need to make improvements or do the improvements, but yet it starts with all of us, of how, going back to the sense of purpose and intention, how do we make the changes how do we influence the culture around us, and through that create the changes in the organization that is really going to be this people-centered learning culture. And so never stop learning and growing. And I have truly found that developing others, just like Mr. Yoshino said, is a path to helping yourself develop as well, because it's so easy to see ourselves as the problem solvers. And yet we need to grow and learn on how we're problem solving and how we're taking control of the things within our own sphere. But what can challenge us more is, how do we help other people do that? How do we balance being an expert with being a coach and supporting someone else, and all these tensions that we need to walk when it's not just us being the person who's out there shining, but how do we help create that team effort and develop others as well? And as Mr. Yoshino says, it's far better to know that we still have to improve than believe we know everything already. Once we have that, we lose that sense of learning, lose that attitude towards learning and improving ourselves as well, then we've really lost that real sense of, we start seeing that we're better than other people and kind of lose that energy and that sense of caring. There, you probably see behind me, I have a whole collection here of these dolls from Japan called darumas. There are many sizes. Here's a little gold one. but I have some big ones up there too that I've gotten from Japanese temples in the town, or Japanese temple in the town where most of these paper mache dolls are made about an hour outside of Tokyo. And there is a saying in Japan, fall down 7 times, get up 8. So have perseverance, keep getting up. This is an attitude towards learning. How do you, when you fall down, how do you get up and learn and continue forward and persevere until you achieve your goal or what you want to, where you want to go? And so these little dolls are weighted at the bottom, and so they represent that as well. The little ones are hard and it's on my hand, but they're weighted and they'll right themselves back up. So keep getting back up when you fall down. And this is so important to the concept of learning. Sometimes we're just like plan, do, plan, do, plan, do, but we're not doing that study adjust, that learning. And so how do we bring forward that attitude towards learning to truly understand and make changes so that we're getting more effective and not repeating the same mistakes over and over again, or fixing the same problems because we haven't really put in place countermeasures that are truly solutions. So I have 3 practices for you to start taking forward into your life today that will help you become a more effective and intentional people-centered leader. So the first is to pay attention to the quality of your questions. This is a funny looking animal, and that is because it is a wolf disguised as a sheep. You'd be surprised, and I want you to pay attention today, or it's the end of the day for you. So over the next 24 hours, pay attention to how many closed-ended questions that are asked yes or no, that you ask or others ask of you, how many suggestive questions, which are really your idea with a question mark on the end of it, or how many questions that are asked with like multiple options. These are not truly questions. These are, your ideas disguised as a question, like a wolf dressed up as a sheep. So if you're truly asking a genuine question to help somebody think about whatever is going on for them, or you really want to hear their answer and not be interjecting your own ideas, you need to stop shifting away from these closed-ended prompting inquiry questions that I call fake questions, and start asking more questions that start with what or how, although sometimes they can be disguised as well. But if you ask a question as what or how, you're more likely to be asking a true question that you are not trying to lead someone to an answer to. And for you, and I'll put this at the end again, I have this coaching questions guide that you can download. I use these in all of my coaching seminars and workshops, and it has a list of questions you can ask and some suggestions too about how to frame questions to be more effective. So I'll put that up again later. The second is to listen openly. And my friend and coaching partner, Karen Ross, has done these drawings. And this is what she always talks about as well, that we need to not only listen with our open ears, we also need to listen with open eyes, so to see what's going on. So like go to the place where something's happening, be aware of someone's body language, see the whole person and to understand really what they're trying to say. Listen with an open mind. So don't come forward with our preconceived assumptions of what should be happening or what's going on for the other person. And then importantly, listen with an open heart to what's going on for the other person as well. This is truly the people-centered element as well, that it's not just what's coming out of their mouth, but so much more. And then I encourage you to take an intention pause. This has been transformational for me and is so helpful to counterbalance this sense of us moving from meeting to meeting and urgent thing to urgent thing, that we forget our role and our purpose often in any like one situation. So just taking 10, 15 seconds to reconnect with what's my purpose in this moment. Say, am I the leader who needs to set direction now? Or am I here right now to help somebody explore and understand the problem that they have ownership to solve? So maybe I need to be asking more questions rather than doing more telling. So what's my purpose, and then how do I align my actions? And that short intention pause can help us slow down and really be more purposeful and less reactive in how we're showing up. And that's how we better align our actions with our purpose. And I like to say that learning is never perfect and it's never complete. Okay, yep. And that's my 7-year-old coming in today. So we're we're homeschooling I'll be with you later, Jack. And that reflection's that reflection is the beginning, not the end of learning. And I want you to take a moment to set your intention. What is one thing you will practice with intention to improve as a people-centered leader? And I would love for you to put that into the chat so we can see that as well. And we're going to shift over to discussions as well. But I wanted to send this to you too, and then Peter and Emma can also send this out. Of course, you can get my book. I always love to hear from you. I have a new workbook that's come out as well, and there you can get all of this on my website. And also you can download the free coaching questions guide that really can be quite helpful as you're practicing asking more effective questions and leading with intention. So thank you, everyone. And I look forward to the questions. And I am going to be back in 30 seconds because I need to get a glue stick for my 7-year-old because he is making, I don't know, St. Patrick's Day things. So as Peter collects your questions, we will be doing that. So I will stop showing my screen and I will be right back. I apologize.
Okay. Thank you for that, Katie. Well, yeah, go ahead.
Yep. Jack.
Okay. Well, Katie does a little bit of parallel processing. Perhaps we can respond to her thought around some intention that we have for ourselves. The other thing I'd like you to think about is we can post these at the same time in the question section, is if you have questions you'd like me to pose on your behalf with Katie, we can have a conversation in the next few minutes. So, while we wait for people to fill anything in and questions or intentions, etc., maybe we'll start with a sort of a bit of a conversation. So we've actually got one coming in, so we'll go straight to this one. So there's a question from Ian here, who says, Katie, what is your biggest challenge in 2021, and what would you try now if you know you could not fail?
Oh wow, so my that's a good question. What is my biggest challenge? That's not the easiest thing to just have a spontaneous to answer to. Well, certainly the thing I would do if I knew I couldn't fail is I'd be leading my Japan study trips again, but that I have some planned for November, and that's just been outside of my control, as Japan isn't even letting people into the country really right now. I think the biggest challenge for me right now has been how to balance what's predictable and what's unpredictable. And so how do we plan for things as much as we can and then have flexibility to respond to the things that are outside of our control. So I know that's not very specific, but that's I think that's just been my biggest challenge over this last year of how to stay focused on the things that are in our control and yet still be looking forward out into the things that we want to do that may be outside of our control. And again, I think this gets back to the concept of intention about who are we and then what do we want to achieve. And we can always control sort of who we are. No matter what's happening in our lives, we can still be working on how we're showing up, even though there may be external factors that are influencing what we're actually able to achieve or do external from us.
Sure. Just on that point, I mean, there's a few things coming in, but I'll just ask this one question. I've been doing a bit of reflection on myself. Is how do you think all the COVID period has maybe affect some of the thinking and some of the approaches that we should do? And I've been sort of thinking around, it's actually, a fundamental shift in work. That it's not, we're no longer going to be doing a 9-to-5 job, 5 days in an office, as knowledge workers, most of the people on the call, that we are going to be, forever 2 days at home. And how does that impact on improvement and Gemba walks and asking questions and all this type of thing?
Yeah, well, I don't see that in changing sort of how we ask questions. And certainly technology has enabled us to do so much. I mean, I think about this whole last year, we've still been able to stay connected. I think this is where it's really important to the go see. It's not just yes, we can have Zoom fatigue, so it's sometimes good not to be on video calls because that's just exhausting. Yet at the same time, not being able to see what's going on for people or see their whole selves also can be limiting as well. So to ensure that we're still having opportunities to truly see and hear what's going on, there are ways to go to Gemba and see. So Gemba just means the place something's happening. It actually, the weather reporters use Gemba for when they go out to talk about the weather in any area. So we can share screens, we can show work that we're doing, even if it's knowledge work. I'm using a video service that captures my screen because I have some team members that I've hired over this last year to show them what I'm seeing on my screen and like video capture with my voiceover. And that's, people are like, wow, this is so helpful, rather than just an email listing out the problem. So how can we use technology to help us? And then, I think we don't know what the answer is when there's going to be a mix of people who are in the office and then people who are still remote. So that's going to be the challenge that we'll navigate through. But how do we use these principles to still help guide us? That people need clarity of direction and purpose. We still need to show that first and foremost that we care about people, and we always need to be looking at what we can do ourselves.
I think on that point, my one reflection, and maybe it's not to do with COVID at all, is actually to see the world through the eyes of the other people, not through my eyes.
Yes.
In a wider sense of, the workforce is like 20, 30 years younger than I am. They've got different experiences. They've got different expectations rather than maybe white middle-aged man sort of view. Anyway, I'm going to get on to some questions and points. So we have a point from Mark, who says, stop jumping in with the answers. I don't think that's a point for you. It's his reflection and his intention.
Yeah. And I hope definitely get that questions guide. It can be very helpful. And another tip on that is when you find yourself jumping in, don't just keep barreling forward. Actually, even halfway through saying something, pause and say, I just noticed I was jumping in. I actually want to hear what you have to say. And so don't keep reinforcing the habit you're trying to dampen.
Yeah. Or even, can you help me with that? Next time I do that, can you point that out?
Right. That's even better. Yeah. That's even better. Tell people what you're trying to practice and get them in to help.
Exactly. Okay, so there's a question here from David. What are some helpful techniques for improving self-reflection skills?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing that I really suggest, and actually is sort of the foundation of all the coaching and teaching I do, is I ask people to start doing daily reflection, even if only for 5 to 10 minutes. So to set their intention for the day, how the actions they're going to take to align with that, and then at the end of the day, say, how did it go? Like just write down, even on like a small piece of paper. And by pausing and slowing down, just even by 5 to 10 minutes, to be more intentional, and then to write down a few reflections of the day helps build that habit, and then it can expand more and more. And maybe you don't in the future have to write it down. Maybe it just happens, but that early process can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I in my last book, I had a section on different operating systems that you need, and one was the leader standard work, and one of the elements of that was reflection in itself. And so the idea of, as you say, thinking of reflection many levels, and saying, well, maybe it's 5 minutes at the end of the day I reflect. Maybe every 3 months with the management team we reflect on how well are meetings going, or maybe once a year we reflect on how's the AE3 problem solving process. Just many levels, many different time scales. You can build it into your leader standard work schedules and so forth.
Absolutely, and Peter, you called out a really important thing, is that we need to be purposeful about that and say, setting when is this the timing for the check or the study or the reflection, whatever word you want to use. Mr. Yoshino talks about that too, like when you do a strategy plan for the year, a Hoshin Kanri as it's called in Japanese, they very clearly say every month we're going to have this type of checking, every 3 months we're going to have this other type of checking, and it's part of the process. And like leader standard work is a tool to help us to develop that habit. So like Mr. Yoshino's never heard of leader standard work because they don't need that tool because it's built into other processes and other expectations. So how do you use tools to help build those habits?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I think we have a point rather than a question here from Thomas. Glad to hear about the workbook. So it looks like you've got at least one sale coming from there. That's great. Also, with regards to reflection, how important it is to keep humble in the process to best learn and develop.
Yes, so true. And I think that gets to the point that Mr. Yoshino made, that if we lose that sense of humility when we sort of stop thinking that we need to keep learning ourselves or that we know it all, and that humility to also know that and accept that we make mistakes and to be kind to ourselves, that we aren't perfect and we're not going to be, and that's okay. And yeah, I'm excited by that you're interested in the workbook. It helps guide through the book even more and brings in some more of these practices that I've talked about today and even more as well.
Very good. Okay, so here's something from Andrew. So hi, Katie, really interesting insight. Do you see parallels with the Toyota Kata questioning objection setting approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So as just a reminder that Toyota Kata there isn't actually a Toyota Kata at Toyota. This is a construct that Mike Rother developed after observing and talking with Toyota leaders, because it was a framework that he was observing of these very things: set the direction, provide that challenge, provide the support through asking clear questions around problem solving, and then developing yourself. That's the concept of that second coach. So yes, it's perfectly aligned with that framework, and it's a structure for practice to be able to develop those skills. So absolutely.
Okay, very good. So there's a point here from Julia, who said she's got a new role 8 days ago. So that's all very exciting. I think she works in the cat industry, interestingly. I would definitely take take an intentional pause when holding meetings and conversations with my new teams. It really resonates with me. So yeah, I think that's. I think even the 10 or 15 seconds is quite a good tip there, because sometimes we just dash straight into the next meeting or the next email, and then we don't really close things out particularly well. So yeah, that's good. Okay, a question from Jesper here. Will the workbook be available on Kindle?
So the workbook actually right now is available as a digital download. So you can either fill it out or print it out. I am planning on having a print version available on Amazon so that you can print that out. I hadn't right now planned on having a Kindle version, but you could download, I don't say that no for the future, but certainly the electronic version would be downloadable to your device and usable that way, so you can actually fill it in. So
right, maybe
for the future, yeah.
Okay, so if you can make sure you let us have links and things to all this stuff, then we can circulate that to everyone afterwards, so that'd be good. Okay, Bengt has a point here. What is your experience on managers adapting to your principles and the magnitude of change in their companies?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I'm actually right now leading a group of 20 managers and leaders from around the world through this process, and that's been a big question of discussion as well. And I always come back to what's in your own control. So how can you start demonstrating these behaviors? How can you help influencing your team by slowing down, asking more questions, having a bit more clarity? Again, changing culture can take a very long time, but we can do it collectively together and start building a movement. I don't know if I answered your question, but it's, again, you can't ever change anyone else. And so, people are getting frustrated by like, oh, their senior leaders don't get it. And so that's where the patience comes in. And how do you help show them a different way? Because you can never force somebody to change how they are, but how do you help support their development as well, even if they're not necessarily your, how do you coach up?
Right. Okay. Well, Bengt, if you want something else, just type that in, and we'll come back on that. So, Yeah, point for me, question for me. So interesting. You've been around the world, and actually, I've worked in Japan and Australia and the UK. So maybe we've been to the same places. Um, but what about this sort of cultural difference issue? Because how things work in Japan and US and Europe and it isn't quite the same. So how applicable is all of this in different cultures?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and one of the sort of the things I was really curious to just understand when I was living in Japan and when I continued to go back, and that I've really come to appreciate how Japanese culture is not the same as Toyota culture. So what we come to know as lean from Toyota is there are elements that certainly came from the Japanese culture, but there are some things that are actually what I'd consider countermeasures to strong Japanese traits. Like it's a very hierarchical society, yet they flip that hierarchy to like leverage it to be able to really have that servant leadership model. It's a place where you don't question, you don't ask questions, you just follow what the leader said. And so there were some things, and imperfection is really, really important. So there are some elements that they have done differently. I would say that all of us, no matter what culture we come from or what culture we're working in, there are going to be different challenges, yet the principles can guide us. How do we create value? How do we lead by caring? How do we ask more questions if we're wanting to like create learning? How do we create flow? From the more of the production principle side, all of these things challenge us, and some things might be easier for us no matter what culture we're in, and some things might be harder. And so the gaps that we need to close, depending on our culture, just are different. But I think the principles get back to, they're quite simple. Like how do we deliver better value with like less waste and more effectively? How do we care about people? These transcend culture. It's just how we implement them, or how they are realized in our area may look different.
Okay, we have a question from Ian here who says, Katie, how would your clients and or teammates describe your lean leadership skills, both positive and developmental?
Oh, that's a great question.
That's a big one.
Yeah. Well, so I think I've become a much more effective leader and coach over the last 10 years, for sure. I talk often about my own journey of moving from more of that expert, coming into things, being the expert with the answers or the independent contributor, and kind of being more telling than asking, even though I really had a desire to help people learn, but my habit was to jump in and be the problem solver. And so I put great intention to my own personal development. I think on the positive, and I do get this feedback that I do ask really good questions and model the way and show, put in place what I'm talking about and practicing. I'd say for me, the thing that I'm always working on is I can, when I feel like there's too much going on, I can easily start to spin into like a frenetic state and overwhelm. And so one of the things that I'm working on is truly, when I'm feeling that happen, how do I slow down? Because when I get in that state, I'm not effective. And so, that's my challenge that I'm continuing to work on, both at home and with my team as well. That and really not just how does the intention pause help like making transition, because I think I'm quite good at that. But when I'm sort of on the meta, when I'm feeling the overwhelm, how do I use that intention pause to reground and then be able to really act in the way that I want to be acting rather than being reactive. So that's what I would say.
Okay, very good. So if there's any more questions, please send them through. But I have one I'm gonna talk about with Katie. So this might take a moment, but I've been doing quite a lot of work and thinking about the learning development sort of side in organizations. And in the HR literature, they use the 70-20-10. 70% on the job, 20% coaching, 10% classroom. And I actually got that wrong, and I sort of read it, and I always thought it was the wrong way around. I thought it should be 10-20-70. So 10% classroom, and then I thought 20% on the job, and then I thought 70% coaching, which isn't actually what the HR guys were saying, but I thought actually that worked much better. So do you think we should have a more coaching and less like practical learning? What's your feel of what the balance of that should be?
How can you? I have a clarifying.
Should I try and say that again? Okay,
yeah, well,
so
I have a clarifying question. So I'm actually labeling
okay.
what you're doing. So how do you differentiate between the coaching and the like developmental learning?
Okay, so classroom is, sit you down for half an hour, whatever. So on the job learning might be, well, it's the sort of classic TWI type stuff, I suppose, when you're actually, practically getting people to learn the skill, practice the skill in front of you, do it several times, etc. Whereas the coaching might be for the 12 months afterwards. You're trying to refine and refine and refine, which actually takes an awful lot of time. And in my mind is a major role for the frontline manager. It's actually that coaching, ongoing development of people, rather than the sort of main learning episode at the beginning. That was my sort of thought process.
Yeah, well, I mean, so I certainly think that classroom learning, sort of like we're doing now, can introduce concepts, and then they need to be put into practice. And I would say that coaching should be part of the on-the-job, what's happening. And there's some coaching needs to happen offline so that people can have a chance to talk in a safe environment. But I would say as much as we can do practicing while we're doing the work, and how do we not have it be as much offline learning, but that coaching and development actually happens while we do the work. And I think that's what Toyota has been able to do so effectively, and the concept of their team leaders are out there to help, and they respond to problems, and they help immediately. And so people are learning and developing, feeling like they're able to really come forward. Certainly they still, even Toyota has offline training and then coaching and development things that happen as well. But I think in the West, we have it flipped. We have so much offline learning that happens in classrooms, excuse me, or away from the work. And so how do we bring in more learning by doing?
Yeah. I mean, I learned some of this stuff, well, 26 years ago, when I spent 3 months working in the Toyota supply chain in Japan, and I did a 50-question benchmark. And I found one question Toyota was worse than the West in. So I thought, aha, I found their weakness. And my question was, how many hours a year do you spend training? And they came up with an answer that was about half that in Europe. So I thought, aha, now I found your weakness. And I sort of realized to myself, you do half the input and you get a better output. So actually, who's the fool here?
Well, right. So how do you find training, right? So they're training while doing. So it's not.
Absolutely. Well, the subsequent question, which I fortunately asked, was how much was on the job and how much was off the job. And generally in Europe, it was 90% off the job, and in Toyota, it was 90% on the job. So that learning was part of the job. But I think the sort of so-called Kata coaching style for me is more coaching than actually the on-the-job learning. That was the sort of differentiation I was sort of aiming at there.
Yeah. Well, I think that yes, although you can still bring those questions into the work as someone's doing it. Like what was your target? What are you doing? The process that's laid out is more of the little offline, because you're stepping away from the actual work. The same that I think I would say that the point of the habits that are trying to be developed through that that framework is one that can be brought into on the job as well. It's how do we ask questions and continue to do those tight PDCA cycles.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we have a question here from Waltrode. How would you deal with people who see coaching as the supervisor coaches because he knows it better and has the answer?
Yeah, so I talk about this continuum that we have to navigate. So it depends on, well, first it's important for the supervisor to have awareness of what's his or her role, and is their role to be always directive and telling what to do. and also what is the competency and the skill set of the person that they're coaching. So when somebody's new to something, they do need to be demonstrating, showing step by step exactly what to do. As someone develops competency, they don't need to be told as much of what to be done. And so I would say it's helping a supervisor start to understand that continuum and how then they can be more effective in their role. And that if they're always showing up telling everyone what to do, it may be having an opposite effect than they're actually wanting to have, which is they're ending up owning all the problems and the problem solving, or their team may be feeling disengaged. Yet at the same time, sometimes people do need you to be directive. And so, and just asking them questions isn't helpful when they're beginners or learning a process. Mm-hmm. So it's really, I would say, it's helping all leaders at all levels understand how to navigate that leadership continuum of how do you effectively provide support. It's not always just asking questions. Sometimes it is being directive, but it's about applying it in the right circumstance based on the complexity of the problem and where the learner's at.
Yeah, I mean, I know some of the, Toyota do most of the development of their own people and their own courses, etc. But I know they use the situational leadership SL2 stuff as one of the sort of learning methods, certainly in the European sites. I don't know about in the States. So that, on balance, we do the coaching and the asking questions, but sometimes we have to be more directive, depending on the topic. We're nearly out of time, but I sort of, I wanted to know sort of what was next on the journey. So you've got the workbook coming out, which is fantastic. So I guess working around that is one thing, but what are you up to next?
Well, this week I'm recording the audiobook for Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn this week and next week. So that will be coming out in the coming months because we got to produce it. That's exciting. Yeah, the workbook is now available, in electronic form. I spent a lot of the winter working on that. I have some courses that I've developed that are based on both my coaching material and the book, and that's been a really nice, fun way to marry up what I've learned from Mr. Yoshino and what I have to offer too. And then again, as I mentioned, I'm really hopeful that I will be able to lead this Japan study trip in November. Again, it's sort of, I'm in a wait and see moment with how the pandemic unfolds. But this is the longest it's been since I've been to Japan. So
the world is holding its breath at the moment, and
totally. So it's exciting. It's been fun to be creative and think about different ways. And I truly love connecting with people around the world, and this is ways that I get to do that as well. I did put in the links here for the coaching question guide and my Academy page, which also links to the workbook. You can also just go to kbjanderson.com, and if you do /workbook, you can go buy the workbook there, and just go to my website, kbjanderson.com. The B and the J are from Brian Jones, which was my maiden name, and so it's my initials. And then Peter and Emma will send out information for other things as well.
Very good. Okay, good. Well, thank you very much. It was great to hear some insights from you. Some very simple lessons, but I think very powerful. So that's been fantastic. So I'm just going to hand over to Emma, who's just going to close us down for the day.
Thank you, Peter and Emma.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you very much, Katie, and thank you everyone for attending. So yes, I will send a follow-up email with the details that Katie mentioned, and you will also receive an automated email with an e-certificate to say that you've attended a webinar by Katie, and also a link to our website where you can register for our upcoming webinars, and also some feedback, which is always really useful for us. So yeah, thank you everyone. Take care and hope to see you soon. Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Peter.
Bye.
Have a great
Bye now.
Thank you.